How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing okay. How about yourself, Thren?
Yeah, I'm not so bad, not so bad. Just second weekend, we're still going live. I guess we're here. We don't have a topic. We stressed difficultly to get a topic prior to going live. What are we going to discuss? And then we didn't come up with anything, but we do have a plan.
We have a
How's your
plan.
evening?
We're, we're here. It's Friday. How was your week, Thren? That's the most important question. Do you feel you've had a productive and good week so far?
Definitely a good and productive week. Very interesting week. There's been lots happening this week. Lots going on. And which is what ultimately led to the struggle around finding a topic to come up with, because it's like, well, actually, I've got a list of things, but all of them seem, I suppose, fairly insignificant in the grander scheme of things, I guess. But yeah. So what about you? How's your week been?
Yeah, it's been a good week. I think, as you say, it's quite hard to avoid the obvious.
Yeah,
There's a lot going on in the news. It feels like an almost hour by hour basis, but we were both just agreeing before the show this evening that this is why we represent as politically homeless, right? Like, we
yep.
it seems like nobody's got a solution forward, and so we're just here to, I guess, shoot the breeze with some of you folks in the chat. Some of you folks watching after the fact, if you wanted to leave us a comment, let us know how your week's been. Let us know if you're fatigued of the news, and let us know if you've got an interesting topic for us to discuss.
Yeah, because I was going to talk about the moon. We were talking about, because obviously anybody that knows us knows that we're kind of space nerds. We love space, really. You know what I mean? We like discussing space topics in general, and we're going to have a chat about the moon. Given that obviously in the recent months there's been a lot more focus with the Artemis program coming up, and obviously a large part of the focus has shifted from Mars to the moon now, which I think is ultimately a good thing, and that's what we were gonna discuss. But then, as I said to Zeff earlier, it just feels like that there's too much going on not to discuss what's going on. Because again, it's crazy, and there's a friend of mine said a while ago. That the whole world just needs to sit down and have a cup of tea. Sometimes it feels like, and they're right. It does, because it just feels like we're kind of always constantly moving further towards tearing ourselves apart. And it's like, what do we do? And just to finish up on this long-winded intro, main reason for starting this channel and why we're standing here as aliens is because we wanted to quite often take an alien's eye perspective of humanity. It's why we're called the Human Dialogue Project. It's why this segment, this live stream is called Our Various Takes on Humanity, because if you were an outsider looking in at us on this planet and how we suppose how we're managing ourselves at the moment, if you were a super intelligent alien race, you'd probably just shake your head and put traffic cones around Earth and go, "Ah, steer clear of that for now. Um, Things aren't going well there." We've got a few issues. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, Zeph.
I mean, we quite often, you and I, theorize about what the future looks like, and in recent times, it almost feels like the future's looking kind of Ready Player One, almost this dystopian, profit driven for corporate greed future where we buy oxygen, or if Sam Altman has his way, we purchase intelligence. Um,
Intelligence.
and it 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 really is a worry. It's something that can't be avoided. We look for happier times, and we do try and take this alien perspective, right? If we take ourselves back from what makes us individual humans, you and I have points we'll agree on, disagree on. Um, but when it boils down to it, we're all humans. We're all occupying the same rock. We're all we've all got this common goal to, as your friend once said, sit down, drink a cup of tea, and discuss what we're doing. You know, like what can we not just sit down like reasonable adults? We live in 2026 where we're on the edge of artificial general intelligence, and we're still throwing rocks at each other like it's the 1600s.
Yeah. It does feel that way sometimes. You know, you look at, and I know we've discussed this in the past as well. When you look at the absolute brilliance that we're capable of as a species, as humanity, and then the complete opposite of that, you know, it is just so polarizing, isn't it? It's like, you know, capable of such amazing genius. You know, I mean, we talked about the space program and space travel. You know, look at all that's achieved. You know, um, but again, it's just like you look on the other side. It's like, yeah, we still get so fixated over the minor differences, and you know, and decide to pick up arms and go to war, and you know, and end lots of lives to resolve minor differences. It just seems crazy. And again, I get that you know there's sometimes unavoidable sets of circumstances that will lead you into certain situations, but it just feels generally overall it's just like we need to calm down. We need to take a step back. We can't continue to charge on this path because it leads nowhere good for anybody, in my view. You know, what is the ultimate end goal in this?
I think
You know, yeah.
Yuri Gagarin said a wonderful statement as the first man in orbit. For anybody that's unaware, Yuri Gagarin was the first human in space. Looking back at Earth, he said, it's from space you can see that Earth is too small for war and just big enough for cooperation. Think about hive minds, okay? We think about these collective actions or call to arms or efforts. I often use cancel culture as a point of reference for hive minding. You'll see somebody like the first real instance we saw of cancel culture was a lady putting a cat in a wheelie bin, a trash can for our American friends, back in the late noughties, and that was the first instance I feel of a hive mind on the internet, where a collective of people from just one grainy video camera managed to track down and identify the lady. And I think that's a small scale hive mind. Now imagine everybody on Earth. Imagine a hive mind consisting of 8 billion plus entities, all working towards a common goal, a common objective. You know, shared collective of people working towards progress. But it feels less and less like that as the days go by, as the clock ticks on. I think as you said a number of times, Thren, they need to change the batteries on the doomsday clock because it's running a little bit delayed. It feels
Well,
like the world's on edge.
I I think the doomsday clock, in a lot of ways, is like washing powder. Because for how many years has whiter continued to get whiter? You know, white. You know, how white can white get? You know, because every year you see new ads about whiter than white. Yeah, and like, well, how white does white get? And again, it's like, how close to disaster can we actually get? You know, again, it's like, because I'd see, you know, we're going to start measuring the clock in Planck lengths eventually. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yep.
before you actually kind of say, well, you know, we need to think differently. We need to change stuff. And again, it just seems like so many things are just heading in the wrong direction. As far as like not just, and I don't just mean, you know, again, obviously there's a few kind of conflicts going on around the world just now, and various problems on that front, you know, and again, and none of that's ever good to hear about. Obviously, there's been other things going on for longer periods of time, but ultimately, the trajectory we're on, it just seems to be that these things are just becoming more and more frequent again. And I did hear somebody say quite worryingly. I was listening to LBC one day, and the point had come across. I think it was James O'Brien or somebody that had kind of mentioned the point that had been quoted about the fact that what we see as normal, as in the period of uh, relative calm, you know, since the end of the Cold War, and even, you know, going back to the end of the Second World War, you know, we've had effectively a fairly stable existence. And you know, their view was if you actually look at a longer time frame, that is the period of abnormality, the period of calm, because what's more normal and more common is for what we're seeing now, yeah, or what we had back then. So it almost saying that, like, actually, well, this is a reversion to normal as opposed to, as opposed to something that's out of the ordinary. And I suppose that's a worrying prospect if that's true.
I mean, we've said for a number of episodes, both our last live episode and a few of the pre-recorded episodes, about just how connected we are as a society. You know, and it's funny. My partner said to me a few weeks ago, imagine if the thing that happened in Europe in the 1930s happened now. Would be getting real-time tweets of tank columns and supply chain updates and stuff. It would be a completely different scenario playing out. And I think to that end, we are connected. You know, what maybe felt distant before the advent of the technological era we're in now feels much closer. You feel more connected to each other globally. So, you know, it almost feels like somebody else's problems now are much closer to home than they were before. Always on technologies like social media, like
Yeah,
instant messaging.
I suppose picking up on that point that you mentioned there, it kind of goes back to what you said earlier about the whole kind of, I suppose, the rise of culture online. I guess the internet didn't create cancel culture; it just gave it global reach and a larger community to draw on. Yeah,
I
and
mean, we
obviously
called it
then as a
shunning
result, greater
before the
influence.
internet, didn't we?
Exactly, again, that kind of thing probably, it still happened at a local level. It still happened in a more isolated way. It's just like the internet's done for so many things. It now gives you global reach with that kind of thing. And if you're looking to build a community of like-minded people, then again, you're always going to find your people on the internet somewhere. This is what the internet, the diversity of the internet gave us, that you're always going to be able to find your niche. It doesn't matter how bizarre or obscure it is. Whereas, previously before that, you might have struggled, and it's the same thing. Again, it doesn't matter if you pick up on one small thing. If enough people see what was wrong with that thing and get behind the thing, they'll do something about it. And sometimes it doesn't even need to be true. For example, Genesis, Phil Collins, "In the Air Tonight." Have you
Yeah,
heard the story about that? The story that's not even true. But how many people have you heard telling you that story about, "Oh, do you know this song stands for this, and he done that thing, and I actually called the
yeah.
person out." And it's like none of it was true, but because the story was one that you could latch onto, and and actually it has some substance here, you can cling onto that thing. People just grab it and run forward with it. But um, I do always remember that as an interesting one, because I remember when I first heard that story as well, thinking, "Man, that's amazing." Yeah, that's crazy. And then finding out that actually none of it was true.
And we've seen reverse instances of this as well, right? We've seen instances where cancel culture on the internet will otherwise apply, only to later find more context to a situation and find maybe actually the person we thought was the aggressor in a situation turned out to not necessarily be the aggressor, or maybe in further context, this really bad situation that everybody hated now with wider context is perfectly acceptable, but cancel culture's already applied. So it works both ways, and I think as a result of that always on mentality, that we're always looking for the next witch hunt, or we're always looking for the next social media sensation, or the next viral opportunity, that we're in a state of heightened senses,
Yeah, I think that's for a large part. I suppose that's because the curve of change when it comes to what's mainstream, what's acceptable, what's taboo and what's not. It evolves and it moves quicker than our, I suppose, sensibilities adjust to those things. How we perceive those things. Stigma, for instance, around we done an open source rethink episode around psychedelics in medical treatments. And part of what we focused on there was the fact that so much stigma still exists around about those medications, even though they've been proven time and time again to have huge benefits. And again, and we spoke to somebody not that long ago that had directly benefited from those kinds of treatments on more than one occasion within their family, but there's still a whole lot of stigma around it. Yeah. And that's it, because we see one thing, time moves on, something becomes more acceptable, but what we see and what we accept doesn't just change because the norms have changed around us. And it comes back to that point I made, I think it was last week, about the way that the rapid move of technology and the internet and large data and AI and everything else is just moving at a pace that generationally we can't keep up. And in relation to being relatable across generations, and the example that I think that I've mentioned in the past is that if you go back a few hundred years, you would find a grandchild, their parents, and then the grandparents, that could all very closely relate to each other, because the world that they'd all grown up in hadn't drastically changed as much. So they could all relate to each other in a much more fundamental and close way. Whereas now, because technology and social media and everything else very much drives and morphs the social landscape, you've seen it yourself. You know, if you grew up in the 80s, some things you seen on TV, you would absolutely never see on TV today, for a variety of different reasons that I'll not go into, but you just wouldn't see them because norms have changed and things have moved along. But it does mean that relatability across generations is affected by that. And today, that curve is moving too fast, which means that the world that, if you're a grandparent today, then the world that your son and grandson grew up in potentially are going to be very, very different from what you're used to. Whereas that wasn't the case a few hundred years ago, and I think that's a huge contributor to why a lot of people today don't feel struggle to feel grounded
There
at
is
all with a lot of things.
there is a couple of relatable points to this. Obviously, I've explained previously, even on this show, about my nan and adopting her to smartphone technologies in the earlier days. But more recently, I've been catching a lot more public transit, as you're aware, behind the scenes. I've been doing a little bit more travelling.
Yeah.
And the surprise I've found recently is older people waiting for buses quite often turn to me and say, "Can you track it on your phone?" And it almost feels like each and every one of these people's carrying a phone in their pocket, but somehow, as the younger person at a metro stop, I'm responsible for seeing if it's close by.
You're the only one that can truly wield it.
And and that sort of speaks to what you're saying there about this generational gap, where they've got the same piece of technology in their hand, they've got the same access I've got, but simply because of the metric in which we've educated ourselves. I've said time and time again about my nan and her typewriting degree. She qualified in typewriting over 2 years, back in the 1940s. You know, to
Yeah.
to compare that now to children aged 2 and 3 that are playing video games and chatting with friends.
Well, that's an important point.
And stuff.
And that actually gives a good lead into the next point, because what I was going to move on to saying was about the fact that the drive of technology sometimes will drive the whole thing around, even career paths, for instance. And you mentioned there, a great point around even industry. As technology changes, industries come up, they disappear. And that point I made before about relatability, even going back, it's like trades. A family trade was something that was passed on down through, for quite often multiple generations, family businesses and things like that have gone on for generations. And again, more and more in the modern day, you find that the technology changes are so fundamental that whole industries do disappear because there's just no requirement for them anymore. And because the technology, I suppose, changes so fast and business requirements change so fast, and there's less, I suppose, hard fixed trades like there were previously, there'll be less of that kind of activity as well. Like you say, like businesses and trades being passed down through families, through generations. Um,
You made a really good reference last week to the movie Cars. where the interstate changed the way people travel across America was the overall story of the movie.
I don't think I made that reference,
You absolutely
but I'm
definitely
aware of
made the
it.
reference.
Did
Um,
it?
but to anybody English, you can translate that over to narrowboating.
Yeah.
At the advent of the industry, or the industrial revolution that occurred across England, and the canalways were built primarily to optimize transit of goods, right? And now it's considered just like a luxury travel option, or for some people, it's a housing option,
Hobby. Yeah. Or a hobby. Yeah.
or correctly so, right? A hobby. You can
Yeah.
hire smaller boats, you can live on the canalways, but primarily this was infrastructure built for an entire industry that otherwise has gone to the wayside. Like you and I were discussing earlier about the coal industry, right? How much coal moved by canalway? It was at least 60% of the overall canal traffic across the lifetime of the operations of the canalway.
Oh,
You know.
Chris is in the chat. Hi, Chris.
Hi Chris, how you
Thanks
doing?
for
Welcome in.
joining. And he's backing up your point, saying the interstate drastically changed the landscape of the US. And it's right. And it did that in the UK as well. You know, the more motorways and, these fast trans routes became available, I was going to mention there. And again, this is something that the Little Chef, yeah, the network of little chefs that used to be in the UK, that almost when we made this big transition over to service stations, on motorways, the little chefs didn't seem to to survive the transition over, and died out in a lot of places. Because it was obviously the petrol station franchises really picked up at that time and started to take on more and more of that.
and
But
we
yeah, it's
we kind of almost didn't realize what we had with Little Chef. I remember it was a love-hate relationship with everybody. Like, it's a uniquely British thing to say Little Chef, but it was almost like Marmite. Some people would be really on board with Little Chef, or you just absolutely weren't. It was an overpriced racket at the side of the road and will avoid at all costs. Or it's a family favourite stop by place on your route. But you're right. That's very much the same thing. This motor revolution that we had that saw people traveling across the UK was optimized, and eventually an entire industry fell behind. Right, like the small mum and pop service model no longer worked. We needed to optimize into big service stations where now you've got a big franchised petrol station there. You've got a franchised food court there, and you know, all in the name of optimization, and it sort of removed that mum and pop industry around the motoring boom that otherwise was, and we're at that point again now where, and I know we keep talking about it, it's such a critical technology, but AI is the same now, where it's going to bury a lot of industries that people just don't realize and are almost going to get side railed from.
yeah.
If they're not
I know, and
careful.
it's you just and you really there's nothing that again the march of progress will continue to march. You know, you can't often stand in the way of something because it disrupts an industry if ultimately it does more good, than it takes away. Like you mentioned about AI, as we mentioned in the last episode, AI and robotics have always been, I suppose, pushed forward from the point of let's adopt these technologies, for the benefit of the workforce, so that people can stop doing dangerous and harmful jobs, people can stop working in harmful and dangerous conditions, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, where's the poll? Where's the choice aspect? Well, which jobs do we not want to do that we can deploy robotics to? It's like people don't get the choice in that, and ultimately, what will more than likely happen is that actually it'll be what's commercially the best route to take, what's going to give the best return on investment in this technology.
And we've already seen
Um,
this with big firing schemes already, right? The likes of Microsoft, the likes of Amazon, the likes of Asda here in the UK as part of a effort to avoid administration. laid off a bunch of administrative staff in favour of AI technologies. You know, these are very much industries that I mean, it feels like the Nokia event. Like Nokia had everything. They had a 96% share on the market, and they refused.
Kodak, yeah, the Kodak moment, the Kodak,
Kodak moment, yeah, BlackBerry,
yeah.
Nokia, and it
I
feels
was.
like
It just shows my age that I go back to the Kodak one as opposed to the Nokia one. Yes, you're younger than me. I'm older. I go back to the Kodak one because Kodak done the same thing. When the advent of digital cameras came out, they railed against making that change
the
and
worst
making that
part of it
shift.
is Kodak invented the digital camera themselves 10 years prior to the market taking off. And they chose not to market it for the same reason they chose not to adopt with the rest of the market, because film sales were, which is the
Oh,
blockbuster as well, right? You pick depending on your age over a 30-year, 40-year span of
Chris is just
companies.
saying in the chat. Sorry, the downside to the major highways was it bypassed small towns that relied on that traffic, and yeah, that was the point you were making, Zeph, before about again, it shifts things away from so many industries that have sprung up around these routes that were there before, and it
And that's
literally
it.
goes past all of them.
You know, I did take the ship across America a month or so back, and I felt that what I was expecting from America, obviously we're receiving interstellar messages just like everybody else. What I was kind of expecting as an American road trip panned out to just be a lot of highway, a lot of interstate, a lot of tarmac under the wheels, more than
Yeah,
what I felt could have been this grand. You know
and
what?
water towers. And
And
water towers. You
water
told me that there's like a town competition almost to who can have the best water tower outside their town.
What is it with this human obsession and water towers in towns in America? Is it when we're talking about the nuances of being human disguised as aliens? What is it with? Can somebody explain the water tower thing? Like, there's just increasingly more impressive water towers the more you travel along the interstate. What you think is an impressive water tower is trumped by the next town over, and they're like two
What do we,
centimeter high water tower.
I'm sure you've seen the same thing around, but again, we do it with like flowers and floral arrangements, in a little raised bed on a banking on the way into your town. That's the way we do it. We don't do it with water towers because we don't really have a lot of water towers. We do it with flowers instead.
we we do tend to like a flowered or a small seated area with a statue.
Yeah, something like that. That's our answer to the water tower. You've got a floral arrangement at the 30 signs on the way into the town. That's that's our water tower equivalent in the UK, I guess.
And a small sign pitched into the road to tell you the town name rather than a 150-foot mega water
Billboard.
tower.
Yeah, yeah. That's it, because quite often the water tower doubles as a sign for the town as well, doesn't it?
It does, and this for anybody traveling across America, like I did recently, is a fun game to play with yourself. Is collect water tower pictures. You're gonna hang on the ship wall forever. Thanks to my
Yeah, no,
Kodak.
like I say, yeah, we just don't have water towers over here. Which again, I've never really missed having water towers. The one thing they have a lot of in America that I do wish we had more of over here, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, flailing balloon men. I think those are amazing. I want to see more flailing balloon men outside the UK shops.
I mean, I've said this several times over. If I'm gonna buy a used car, you can absolutely upsell me as long as you've got a flailing balloon man outside your
You've got
garage.
one of them. Absolutely. The thing is, especially in Scotland, we've got the absolute ideal conditions. Our flailing balloon men would flail harder than most people's.
The giant flags as well. I think recently I discovered a thing outside car dealerships. These flags as big as my house. Um, so I think as long as you've got a flag that's big enough for a homeless person to pitch as a palace, and a flailing balloon man, it's probably a reputable car joint.
The flailing balloon man, I think, is one thing, but I honestly think the huge flags. You know how windy it can get here. You know, it's. I think that would almost be a risk, more of a risk than anything else. You know, if a flailing balloon man breaks loose, it's not going to do that much harm at the end of the day. But these big flags are so big, um, it
I mean,
creates quite an obstacle if the wind catches it and it's in your way.
I'm not so convinced, you see. I think I'd underestimate what a flailing balloon man could do, because I'd be like, hey, look how happy he looks, not realising it's a 40-foot long flailing balloon man.
This is absolutely guaranteed that when you were in Texas, you saw some huge flags. I know, because everything in Texas is just bigger than it is anywhere else. Chris, we've had this discussion. Even the sky is bigger than it is in most places, which always confused me because I thought no matter where you were in the world, the sky was the same size. But apparently in Texas, it's bigger.
Even the
All
clouds.
the clouds.
Yep, the clouds, the road lines. The street signs are bigger in Texas. The gas stations are definitely bigger.
I think some of the you remember I told you that I quite like the YouTuber Beard Meets Food.
Yes.
And I used to, and I just still to this day don't know how he does it. When you look at the guy, but yeah, I'm sure some of the steaks that he used to. I'm sure Texas was again where he would get some of his biggest um, steak challenges was in that neck of the woods as well.
I
You know,
mean,
because everything is just bigger.
I know that I saw the all-you-can-eat candy buffet down near Houston, and I was like, you know me, Thread, I'm a sucker for a candy, and I was kind of like, $12. I wonder how much I can bankrupt this company for an all-you-can-eat candy buffet. I just
That just sounds dangerous
it,
to me.
it it sounded exactly as dangerous as you think it sounds, which is why I eventually gave it a skip. But
That sounds to me like a German market, continental marketplace, because they have every time I've been to one, they've always got these fudge stands with every type of fudge you can imagine, and it's usually like, you know, a massive big, kilo bag of
yeah,
it for ridiculously small amount of money. So of course you end up buying lots more than you need. And I've got a terrible addiction to fudge and tablet and anything like that that's high sugary stuff. So it's just dangerous for me to be anywhere near somewhere like that.
um,
Which is why I said, again, I don't struggle with, again, fast food restaurants and wanting to eat fast food all the time. If they ever brought Dairy Queen to the UK, that might be different.
I think there's there's a few uh, things that I was kind of like, you know me, I'm a sucker for a soda, right? So it's like, since
A
getting back
pop,
to the UK, a pop,
pop,
yeah,
as you
a
call it down
pop,
there.
or a fizzy drink, as they'd call it in London. Um, since getting back to the UK, I've found I've been slightly bent over, and I feel kind of low key violated at the price I'm paying for Baja Blast. I'm paying for like a 300 ml can, what I'd get almost a litre of Baja Blast for in America. So I think we've got way off topic. We're talking food and drink now. But yeah, that's what.
Do you
While
know
we're
what?
already,
Actually, just on that topic, I want to when eventually we've got like more people tuning into view, we need to start making squirrels a thing. So squirrels are an emoji that can be used in the chat, and I think people just need to, if we're going off topic, too far off topic, just drop some squirrels in the chat for us, and that'll tell us we've gone down a squirrel hole and we need to come back on topic. So I think squirrels in the chat needs to be our sign, our thing,
put
because
squirrels in the chat if we've gone off topic.
we've gone off topic too far. Drop some squirrels in the chat. That's what to do. That's our sign. That's our signal.
so, um, so yeah, we went from American road trip right round to Baja Blast. Welcome to the Human Dialogue Project, ladies and gentlemen.
You never got on board with the whole Prime fad, did you?
I mean, the child's the child definitely is still very much on board with the Prime fad. And I know he was kind of trying to convince me to try and pass through airport customs with liquids to bring him some back from the US. So he's still very much a thing for him. I'm not too sure how much it's still a fad. For me, I prefer something
Not a
fizzy.
single drop of Prime has ever passed my lips. I've never even tried the stuff.
Not
I
one.
have to admit.
It's an otherwise healthy drink if you're getting the hydration one. It's coconut water. It's obviously a bit flavoured, but it's by no means the worst drink. I just think it tastes a bit too synthetic. I have tried a few.
But I heard. I think the thing for me was I heard so many stories about it before I even got the opportunity to drink it about the fact that you were paying a ridiculous amount for a can because somehow it had ended up like Bitcoin, and it was just super popular and valuable. I don't know what that was all about, but
I know initially, and I can sort of speak a little bit on the perspective of a parent paying over the odds for a I mean, I call it a mediocre drink at least. I think a lot of the fad boiled down to, I mean, the same thing that makes Pokemon cards unique, right? They've got unique designs on each one of the bottles. Each one's got a slightly different flavour. And I know whilst we can slightly squirrel hole back and say, whilst I was in America and travelling the interstate, Prime seems to be a big money business in America. It seemed like every third or fourth truck was a Prime truck. It's by no means a small company by this point, and I think that a lot of that boils down to hype marketing. You know,
more importantly, and on a completely separate squirrel hole, how did they get away with using the Prime name? And Mr. Bezos didn't have an issue with that.
I think this the same reason Optimus didn't have too much of an issue when Jeffrey used it. I think Jeff tried and failed, if I'm not mistaken.
With Optimus or the Juice Company.
I mean, either or, right? Optimus also tried to copyright it, and
He doesn't like Optimus anyway. I've always thought the guy was a bit of a Decepticon.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Jeff Bezos not only has
the man
money,
that could be Santa but chooses not to be. Sorry, I ruined that for you.
You ruined it for me. He has the money, he has the supply network, and he has my wish list. Jeff Bezos could absolutely be Santa Claus, but chooses not to. So you've at least got to be slightly evil at that point. If nothing else, if you could just absolutely be Santa for 1 year and choose not to, you've got to be slightly evil. You've got to put like kittens in wheelie bins in your spare time or something.
Yeah, like I say that. I know that was a completely separate squirrel hole, but it just seemed relevant to say that at the time because, we were talking about this previously about again the number of things that suddenly you can't say or you can't use because of like brand names is what we were talking about as an association with something comes about because it's the only thing. And I don't think Amazon Prime have really got that yet. They've not cornered and not the same way that Google, if you're going to search for something, you Google it, don't you? You don't, I'm going to do a web search, I'm going to Google
Yeah.
something. It's generally what most people kind of say often.
You do
Like, and
internet
that when we
shopping,
talk
you don't do Amazoning.
exactly, yeah, it's like they've not gotten that big that you've associated that thing only with them, not like Hoover, yeah, and vacuum cleaners.
Do you remember
But
the
the
failed
Hoover,
dash button from Amazon where they did try to become the go-to for online shopping?
don't even that's how bad a job they did of launching that because I don't even remember that.
The dash button was a little IoT
No,
device
right.
that was, in essence, a purchase a single item button that you could just link to an Amazon purchase. So you could say, Amazon's envisioning of this button was, oh, I'll put one of these under the sink where I would keep a cleaner. And then as that cleaner runs out, I can press the button and a new one arrives.
Right, I see.
These ended up creating, I guess, like I want to use the term DDoS requests almost at Amazon, where they would be accidentally used or they'd be discovered by a child. What does this button do? And I'll order like 600 washing tablets or like 40 bottles of Coca-Cola or things like
Or
that.
the
So
new
it's
or the new bottle of bleach that you purchased after your dash button told you needed a new bottle of bleach fell over in the cupboard and is
and
constantly pressing the button down.
and this was it. So the Dash program was retired due to the amount of returns that transpired as a result of Dash buttons. Similarly to the, you know, while we're on this, while we're here, we're talking Dash buttons, ladies and gentlemen. We were supposed to be talking politically homeless. We're talking Amazon Dash buttons. While we're at it, and this does kind of somewhat bring us back round, Spotify's car thing is a point of contention for me. Because Spotify released it as a solution to use their service in your car, only to brick the device and not even allow it to be open sourced after the fact. And it came to mind because Amazon did a similar thing with the Dash button, right? They built this incredible IoT device only to brick the service and not allow it to be open sourced for the thousands of units sold. And that really bugs me. This is where we go back round to hive mind mentality. If companies like Amazon and Spotify or there's a famous website, the Google Graveyard, for anybody watching after the fact or in the live stream. Google Graveyard is a website dedicated to the services and products that Google killed that people used.
Yeah, I remember there was a video streaming platform a wee while ago that you had to migrate your content out of before a certain time because it had been taken over and anything that you'd purchased had to be moved. I can't even remember what it was now, but I remember hearing a lot of people getting really annoyed because there was some things that they had purchased that just there was no ability to migrate them or download them, and folk lost out on stuff that they'd actually paid for. And I used to have that issue with a lot of online games, where again you've paid for a DLC, I've paid
That's
for
the case
content,
more so
and
now.
then they remove content to replace it with new DLC, but like I can no longer play the DLC that I've purchased now. So, yeah, I fell out with a couple of games for that reason.
So, well, good time to mention Stop Killing Games, and their entire initiative is worth Google searching after you've finished this show to the last minute. Where Stop Killing Games is advocating for that very reason. We find that in 2026, for anybody unaware, most end user service agreements have you agreeing unknowingly to rentals of the titles that you otherwise assume you're purchasing. I think Nintendo recently got a lot of backlash because they were quite open about their lease not own standpoint regarding the Switch 2. That left quite a lot of backlash, but you're correct in saying, it's not just Nintendo with the Switch 2, it's the likes of Steam, the likes of Epic, EA, Sony, with discless consoles. I remember.
On that point, I just want to interject for a moment because something that you've said on that topic in the past about, we accept T's and C's and we don't read streams and streams of pages of text because who has the time to do that often? So you just generally accept T's and C's when you're signing up for online services or buying a device. And I know you mentioned this in the past. For all you could be agreeing to give up your firstborn child to Apple for all you know. You know what I mean? It's like
This is
you
page
don't get a say in it.
147 of Apple's user agreement, isn't it? Your firstborn son and thirdborn girl.
But what I was going to say was, if there was any, we've talked about AI a lot. There's a damn good use case for AI. Well, why don't we do that? Because we can't read loads of text. Given the context size of most, like GPT, for instance, there's a good chance you could easily get your T's and C's read and understood. And can you pick out anything there of concern? That's something useful for AI.
And this is, we see people for and against AI, right? Like, you and I are both very much real. These avatars were designed by a human. The
Yeah, I,
starfield you see behind each of us is designed by a human. The ship that we're each standing in is designed by an AI. Are people going to say this is an AI created show? I can promise there's at least one person in the comments on any given channel like ours, where we're using digital inputs that do incorporate AI techniques. We're finding more and more that people are quick to say that even the likes of you and I voicing things are AI slop.
yeah.
You know, we've seen people for and against AI, and I think it's like anything. It's a watch this space technology. It's either this overhyped bubble that's gonna burst like so many people are claiming, or it's just gonna quietly shuffle into what we've already been seeing it do for 15, 20 years, and that's just quietly go from, hey, this is a big deal, like your friend AlphaFold friend. You you quick to mention to people about AlphaFold when we're talking about AI technologies. AlphaFold isn't new like GPT or Google's Gemini or Anthropic's Claude, like these consumer usable models. But quietly behind the scenes, it's been doing amazing things in the medical field for enough years that it's now almost become a normal practice. And I think we're slowly seeing that with AI technologies in general.
We were talking about a filtration device for water. And I think I was making the point there as well, because it's not just in medicines, again, it's materials as well, materials research and the number of, routes and the speed at which it can propel a lot of those things forward. Um, yeah, but like you said, it's like there are. You're right. There's people that look at this in both ways. Some people that will only see the negative. But it's been the same throughout history with every big technology juncture we get to, where there's a huge curve, a huge change. Like I say, whether it's the internet, whether it's even farming, farming machinery that allows like combine harvesters, that
Yeah,
probably displaced a lot of people that used to manually harvest. It doesn't matter what technology advancement we make, it will disrupt and change. If it's a viable and usable enough, beneficial enough technology worth investing in, then that investment is only coming because of the fact that it's a disruptive technology. So you can't be wholly surprised when that new technology suddenly disrupts things. Because again, it's otherwise it would never have went forward if it wasn't going to be disruptive. This is why we make these large changes. We don't move until there's something, and this has been proven out time and time again with lots of different things, not just with technology shifts, but with lots of different things. We don't change if there's nothing that's forcing us to change. When the need to change is driving us to the point that we undergo the inconvenience of changing stuff because we typically don't like change, if it's not necessary. So, the fact that we make these changes and we move on and we advance shows that well, there's clearly a need for it. Yeah, and I think that's ever so true today. With everything that we are trying to achieve, the challenges that we have, just to kind of start wrapping things up, just to kind of suppose sum that up. It's like, well, we've got lots of problems to solve. Bringing this all the way back to the start of the conversation about, you know, everything seems to be driving towards dividing things more. There's more conflict. There's more division. Even politics itself. There's more divide us down the middle and push us further apart. And I don't like that. We don't like that. And that's why we have this show. That's why it's called Politically Homeless, podcast for the politically homeless, because to us, again, a lot of politics around the world is just doing the wrong thing. It doesn't do what politics or governance in general is designed to do, which is to bind and hold society together. And our politics at the moment seem to be doing the opposite of that. And that's, I suppose, the distraction from a lot of the real problems that we do have to solve. Like you mentioned about technology, and yes, we were on the cusp of things like quantum computing. We've barely got past the point of being able to fully appreciate and deal with things like the internet and social media and everything else, but we're already marching way past those things. The technology moves faster than we can sometimes keep up, and that in itself creates its own challenges and dependencies. You know, we just to bring it back to the planetary stuff that you mentioned. We talked earlier today about the Carrington event, and you know, if we just completely lost the internet and communications capabilities overnight, say the sun, something happens with the sun, and we just don't have these things. What do we do? You know, how do you actually deal with that? But that's a whole conversation for another day, I guess.
That's that's a good place to leave it. Then that'll be our next chat. What do
Right.
what do humans do in the event of a Carrington event? Coming next Friday here on the Human Dialogue Project.
Talk about what happens when the plug gets pulled. And again, I do follow a couple of channels that follow the sun, and the sun has been quite busy recently. And there's been a few events over the past few months that I'm aware of that, you know, had that occurred at a different point in time. Could have been a very different thing. But yeah, let's delve into that next Friday. Thanks very much, Chris, for tuning in and watching along. And thanks to anybody that watches this afterwards. And we'll keep the conversations coming each Friday. And yeah, stick with us.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. See you next week.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.